Welcome to this edition of the Star Drive Report. Before our guest comes on, I have to relate a story that has important bearing on what we're going to be discussing today. In August of 1996, I went on a 10-day backpacking trip with an old buddy deep into the northern Yosemite National Park backcountry. We were about 3 days into the wilderness when we camped well off the trail at a high subalpine lake named Mahan Lake. This lake is a narrow finger lake sandwiched between a low ridge and a higher ridge about a half-mile long and a couple of 100 feet wide. The sun had just set behind the higher ridge when we decided to walk a couple of 100 yards up to the top of the lower ridge to smoke and sip our brandy and catch the beautiful alpenglow. It was eerily silent, with none of the usual chirping of birds that usually occurs around sunset. As we were enjoying the views, we suddenly heard a loud racket coming from a flat lodgepole pine-forested grove about 500 yards below the ridge. It sounded like an African bull elephant crashing through the woods. Huge branches were being snapped, some almost sounding like gunshots. Then we heard a deep, loud, guttural huffing and grunting sound. It was so loud you could almost feel it. We couldn't see the source of the noise as it was hidden by the thick brush and trees. I was about to yell something down at the source of the noise when my buddy put his finger over his mouth, motioning to me not to say anything. We were freaked out at what we were hearing, the hair standing up on our arms. I remember that because both of us held out our forearms while shaking our heads. The racket went on for about 10 to 15 seconds until whatever was making the sound moved away from us out of the treed area. We left the ridge and went back down to our lakeside camp and tried to rationalize what we just heard. We couldn't. We ruled out bear or deer, as neither of them make that kind of noise or snap huge branches when they move through the forest. We also ruled out a human, as no human could snap the kind of branches we heard being snapped. Neither of us were armed, so we immediately started gathering a huge pile of wood for a large fire, thinking that would scare off any intruder. Needless to say, neither of us slept well that night. Right around dawn, I got up to take a whiz, and as I was standing there, I witnessed an extremely bright, fiery blue-green teardrop-shaped object silently flying horizontally from west to east above the higher ridge on the other side of the lake. The object was about the diameter of a dime held at arm's length, with a blue-green fiery tail about 3 times the length of its width, and was visible for around 5 seconds before it disappeared from view. It didn't look like your typical piece of re-entering space junk or a bolide. I just put it aside and went back to bed for a couple of more hours of sleep. Later, after breakfast and coffee, I decided to hike down to the grove of trees where we heard the racket. The understory was littered with down branches and other leaf litter, so no footprints could be seen. Then I looked up and saw the trees. A number of dead and green lodgepole branches around 4 to 6 inches thick and around 10 to 15 feet high had been freshly torn off from the trees, some even stripping bark down the sides of the trees. To this day, neither I or my buddy have ever been able to come up with a rational explanation for what we witnessed. But in my subsequent research, I came across an individual who's been collecting and investigating highly strange incidents like this for over 40 years. Stan Gordon was trained as an electronics technician who specialized in radio communications. He has been researching UFO sightings, Bigfoot encounters, and other mysterious events in Pennsylvania since 1959. Stan is the primary investigator of the 1965 UFO crash incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, and has given illustrated lectures both locally and nationally on topics of UFOs, Bigfoot, cryptids, and strange encounters since the late 1960s. Stan has also been taking calls on UFO sightings and other strange reports from the public since 1969, and he continues to receive unusual reports on a regular basis. He's the producer of the award-winning UFO documentary Kecksburg, The Untold Story, and author of 3 books: Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO-Bigfoot Casebook, Really Mysterious Pennsylvania, and his latest book, Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures. Stan has been seen on the History and Discovery Channel, Sci-Fi Channel, Fox News Channel, Destination America Channel, and Unsolved Mysteries, as well as numerous other TV programs, and has been a guest on the Coast to Coast radio show a number of times. You can check out Stan Gordon's UFO Anomaly Zone website at www.stangordon.info and contact him at sightings.stangordon.info if you'd like to file a report. I'd like to welcome our guest, Stan Gordon, to the Star Drive Report. How are you doing, Stan?
We're doing very good, thank you.
You know, I read your book, Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO-Bigfoot Casebook, years after I had an episode of high strangeness that I experienced in a very remote part of Yosemite National Park back in 1995. And we can get more into that later if you'd like. But that book really put everything that happened to me and my buddy that evening and the next day into perspective.
Well, I've had a lot of response from that book. I still do get a lot of response from around the country, even around the world. And I started documenting that information as it was happening back in 1973 when we had that major, what I believe was probably the largest Bigfoot and UFO outbreak that ever occurred anywhere in the country. Went on for weeks and months here in Pennsylvania. And it was during that time that some very strange situations began to come to our attention from witnesses from a widespread area. And it's something that I had not expected to run into, but it's something I couldn't sweep under the rug and pretend it wasn't being reported.
What was it about those incidents that really struck a chord with you? I understand there was a UFO connection with many of those incidents. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it'll take a few minutes. I should probably give your listeners a little bit of background, a little bit of history.
That's fine.
I started in this back in 1959 when I was 10 years old. I've been out in the field investigating incidents since 1965, so actually it's 60 years of research for me this year. But 1969, I set up a hotline for the public to report UFO sightings. And it got to the point very quickly that there were so many reports of not only UFOs, but all kind of phenomena coming in that I realized that I couldn't do this on my own. So I decided to set up a research group, a volunteer research group. And I founded that first of three groups back in 1970. It was in the Pittsburgh area, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's called the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. And it was kind of unique in that the people who I got involved in, to my surprise, who we got involved were scientists and engineers and technicians, former military intelligence people, police officers, all kind of reputable, specialized people in most cases who got involved in the group. And majority of people who work with me did it anonymously because of their positions. But
Right.
We did this around our full-time jobs. We responded to cases 24 hours a day. And by 1973, we had extended to cover the whole state of Pennsylvania. And we were receiving reports from many, many different sources, and to our surprise, from law enforcement, from the news media, and we were extremely busy. And first, we had the biggest UFO wave. There were literally hundreds and hundreds of UFO reports coming in from January 1st to the last day of the year. And, of course, as I've stated many times, what I learned years ago is that many reports, whether it be a UFO or a Bigfoot, other phenomena, quite often initially they may seem strange and unusual, but when you take the time to properly investigate them, many determine to be either natural or man-made in origin. So there were a lot of cases we could explain, but during that time, there were numerous reports of large solid objects seen actually very close to the ground. And there were many reports of these things chasing vehicles, hovering over highways. There were incidents here in Pennsylvania over the Turnpike. There were landing reports, sometimes with physical traces. It was an amazing time. And back then, in 73 and 74, the news media was covering it very seriously and very heavily around this area. Some of our investigators were making local and national news, and it was an amazing time. But it was during the summer of 73 that we had the biggest outbreak of Bigfoot sightings, I believe, ever documented. And it went on for months and months into 1974. And many of these Bigfoot sightings were not a glimpse of something running through the woods at night. Many of these were daylight sightings at very close range, sometimes multiple witnesses, sometimes multiple creatures seen together. Either my teams or the police or both in some cases were on the scene within minutes to hours after they happened. So we're documenting all this data as it's occurring. And it was just an amazing time to live through. And what I should tell you and your listeners now, because this will probably surprise a lot of people, in the 60 years that I've been doing this year, I have never personally seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself. I've interviewed thousands of witnesses. We've seen a lot of evidence out in the field during investigations, but I've never had my own personal encounter. But as all these sightings are occurring back in that time period, when I initially got involved in this, I was aware of the Bigfoot reports in Pennsylvania going back historically for many, many years. And I was investigating cases in the late 1960s. And everything I knew about Bigfoot at that time suggested that we're dealing with an unknown type of animal, an unknown primate. But as these events of 1973 are beginning to unfold, some very strange things began to come to our attention. One of the first things was that our teams would get to some of these locations. Soon after an incident, there'll be trails of footprints. But in some cases, these tracks would go on for a distance, then suddenly stop and vanish, when there should have been more tracks. This has even shown up in fresh snow, and as recent as several weeks ago, this kind of thing is going on. So the sun has been gone for quite a while. So back to 73, as all these reports are again continuing, we began to notice some unusual patterns. And one of the patterns was we would have a UFO sighting in a particular area. Within minutes to hours to days later, we would have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then the cases got very dramatic, very well documented, very detailed, where we had UFOs and Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place. And ever since that time, I've been in touch with investigators from throughout the country and around the world. And I started writing about this in the early 1970s, probably about 1974, 75, after all these incidents were going on. And I began to make people aware about some of the unusual things that were showing up. And I found out from many other researchers, again, locally, nationally, internationally, that many of them were aware of similar reports. And some of them, especially in the United States, were experiencing similar phenomena, but they were so strange and so unusual, they were reluctant to talk about it or publish their reports for being they're afraid of being ridiculed by their peers.
Right.
My position has always been, I don't have the answers, but I want to document this stuff and let people know this is what we're finding. And in more recent years, we're finding many reports from around the country. More and more researchers are beginning to talk about these same things that we talked about years ago, and it's something that's now being discussed a lot more seriously.
You know, we have all these geographically and culturally unconnected legends and all the historical and present-day anecdotal accounts of some enormous unknown hairy hominid roaming the earth. So I'm going to play skeptic here. And a logical question follows, where are the bodies or the bones?
And that's exactly the question I've been asking for years. You know, you listen to all these witnesses. I've interviewed hundreds of people in Pennsylvania who have had these encounters. And believe me, for many of these people, it was a life-changing experience. So many of the people I've interviewed, even in recent weeks, are people that had no interest in Bigfoot, didn't believe in it, and once they had their encounter, their lives have been changed. There's no doubt about it. And it's just amazing what goes on. But I've been saying for years to those in the field, if these are some type of unknown animal, after so many years from such a widespread area, from throughout the country and many parts of the world, something similar is being seen, and yet we have no bodies, it makes absolutely no sense at this point.
No, it doesn't. And that's what fascinates me, because I'll just go in my experience briefly, what happened to me. I really never really had any interest in Bigfoot. I'd seen the Patterson-Gimlin film like everyone else had, and read a few early books. I think John Green, I think, was one of the guys. I'd read a number of books about it, and I've been backpacking the Sierra Nevada since I was a child. I mean, I know that. I mean, I go way out there. I go out for 2 and 3 weeks at a time, sometimes by myself. And I was out one night at a very remote lake, and we had just had dinner, and we're up on a ridge top. And below us, about maybe 300 or 400 yards, is this flat forested area, maybe about a quarter of a mile square, very thick lodgepole pine. And we're up there smoking our cigars and sipping brandy. And all of a sudden, we hear what sounded to me and my buddy like a large male African bull elephant crashing through the woods. I mean, I'm talking about branches breaking that sounded almost like gunshots going off. They were so big. And we're standing there with our mouths open. We couldn't believe what we were hearing. And I was about to yell something, and my buddy wisely said, don't say anything. He's, shushing me up. And we listened. This went on for about 20 to 30 seconds, and we heard these really deep, loud, guttural grunts, huffs like, hoo, hoo. And, bears don't do that. Bears are as quiet as can be. They can walk into your campsite, and you'll never hear them. Same thing with deer. You might hear the sounds of their hooves on granite. So, we were freaked out. And we built a huge bonfire, and we were, neither of us were armed, and we knew we had heard something neither of us had ever experienced in our life out there and couldn't explain it. But to make a long story short, the next day I went down to that area, and the forest understory was littered with downed branches and leaf matter, and, so I was looking for footprints. I couldn't find any footprints, but what I noticed were huge, fresh green 4 to 6 inch thick branches torn off the trees at the height of about 10 to 15 feet. Now, I have no idea what on earth could have done that. And that's when I read your book. I read your book after it came out. This was years after, your book came out years after our experience. And that's what really got me fascinated. And I'll have to say, I've almost become obsessed by it. I listen to Sasquatch Chronicles and a lot of these accounts of people. Of course, they're anecdotal. We have no way of proving whether or not this stuff is just being fabricated. But, I've heard stories. I've actually talked to law enforcement officers who have seen them, but they can't talk about it because they don't want to wreck their careers. And I'm just wondering if there's some kind of official protocol in place for law enforcement to deal with these kinds of sightings, because they seem very reluctant to talk about it. I've been able to get nowhere. I've been trying to crack the law enforcement, law enforcement Bigfoot connection, and I can't get anywhere. I always hit a wall.
Well, again, over the many years I've been doing this, I've interviewed witnesses from all types of backgrounds, including police officers. And back in the 70s, I think in the early 80s, and since then there have been some police incidents. And there have been I interviewed another police officer a couple years ago that had an amazing encounter with a very bizarre cryptid, not a Bigfoot. And there have been other similar reports since then as well. And, they do report them. I have talked to different ones over the years. I've talked to quite a number of first responders of different types who have had encounters themselves with various phenomena, and even in recent years. So it does go on. And here in Pennsylvania, again, my hotline's still open. It's never stops ringing since 1969. Between that and the emails that come in here, it's amazing the reports that go on. And we can only imagine how much of this is going on that we don't even hear about. Or weeks, months, or years later, we might hear about something. It happens all the time. I get many past reports just coming in on a more recent basis. But police officers, other credible people, hunters commonly see these things out in the woods. And, even for hunters, many of these fellows I talk to, they've been out in the woods all their lives, 20, 30 years, and never saw a thing until that one particular day. And some of these people, again, their lives were dramatically changed after their encounter. But the reports are out there. There's no doubt about it. And something is going on. And last year, 2018, was very active with a lot of Bigfoot activity here. And this activity and other phenomena with UFOs and other phenomena has been continuing right up through the last couple of days here into 2019. So it's been very, very busy. Nothing even close to the 73 outbreak. But some of these Bigfoot reports are significant. And I can go over some of these with you. And interestingly, a number of these reports have that high strangeness aspect to them. And I'm getting this from other researchers as well. So there's something going on out there, and it's been pretty interesting, I can tell you, for the last year or so.
Have you come to, it's hard to come to a conclusion about something that we have no physical evidence of. We don't have any bodies, we don't have any bones, but we have an incredible amount of detailed observations by people, and many, many reliable people. I'm at a loss to explain it because any animal that is as big as some of these creatures are as reported as being would have to consume an enormous amount of calories just to survive every day. And it's interesting that sure you have encounters way out in the boonies like we had, but we've got all these encounters from people that are right outside of urban suburban areas. We're not talking about Yosemite or Yellowstone or the Pacific Northwest National Forest. We're talking about areas in East Texas and Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is not exactly a wilderness area. I mean, they have some nice mountains up there, but people are seeing these creatures near their houses, and that's what blows my mind.
And that's
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And what we're saying, yes, we do have a lot of forests and mountains and woods of Pennsylvania, but that is correct. In more recent years, and it's been going on for quite a while, but even in more recent years, we're getting more reports near more populated areas outside of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Harrisburg. I mean, a lot of major areas, and a lot of these are areas where there's not a lot of woods around.
Right.
And we're getting some really significant reports. And one of the areas that we're hearing more and more about, I started documenting information on it back in the 60s, is along the Chestnut Ridge. And the Chestnut Ridge is a mountain range that extends from where I'm at here in southwest Pennsylvania to Westmoreland, Fayette, and Indiana County, stretches down into near Preston County, West Virginia. So it's somewhere around 100 miles long. But it continues to be, year after year, one of the most active areas in the country for repeated anomalies. So you have UFO sightings, encounters with Bigfoot, other cryptids such as the Thunderbirds, these huge, giant flying creatures that many people reporting, the Black Panther sightings, other type of entities, underground sounds, mystery booms, all kind of strange things go on, even again in more recent weeks up along the ridge. And it's very strange. And I'll be glad to tell you about some of the sightings that has happened in the last year.
Stan, I forgot to mention on that sighting that I had, the morning after that, when I got up to take a whiz, about 5 in the morning, we're at a very, very narrow, high alpine lake, and there's a very high ridge on the other side of the lake that went up about 1,000 feet. And I'm standing there, and I saw the most incredible blue-green, teardrop-shaped fireball going directly horizontal across the sky at a very slow rate of speed. It didn't look like space junk or a bolide. I don't know what it was, but from arm's length, I used to be a MUFON state section director, so I did a little bit of this kind of stuff. And this thing was about the width of a dime at arm's length, and it was just traveling across the sky silently, bright blue-green flame trailing off about maybe 3 or 4 times the body length of this object. And I can't help thinking that what I heard the night before and what I saw that morning may have been related.
Well, again, I've heard that story so many times.
Really, really.
And in more recent years, and it's not just in Pennsylvania, it's all over the country. I've talked to many researchers, some well-known, some who are kind of quiet and keep kind of low-level behind the scenes. But in many parts of the country, Bigfoot researchers who are going out investigating Bigfoot sightings in areas where there's a lot of Bigfoot history, they're looking for Bigfoot evidence. They're not finding it, but they're reporting seeing strange objects in the sky, strange orbs of light. What we've been hearing about for some people up on the ridge where there's been a lot of Bigfoot activity in Fayette County, they're seeing multitudes of these like oversized giant fireflies that do not act like natural fireflies. And what's interesting is they claim, people have seen them, said they're just not a flash of light, but they actually illuminate the surrounding area when they're moving.
Interesting. So they're internally illuminated then.
Yeah. And going back to the 60s, since then I've investigated many what I call mini UFO sightings. So some people are not even aware of these. But these generally luminous objects, but sometimes solid metallic, are only a few inches to a foot in diameter. And while quite often they're spherical, sometimes they're elongated. Or I had a case 2 years ago where this thing was, a witness was within about 10 to 12 feet from this thing, and it was in a garage, a fully lit garage early morning when he went out to warm up his wife's car. And this, he said, the only way he described was it looked like a mini haystack, about 2 feet tall, and it was kind of translucent. And it was the strangest thing he'd ever seen. And it shot down from right to left against the back bumper of the vehicle, and then shot straight down in the dark area of the garage and disappeared. But these little luminous objects, again, sometimes luminous, sometimes metallic, they're very intriguing because while they don't seem to hurt anybody, they come very close to people. They buzz around people's heads. They move very close to people. I had one several years ago at a beautiful afternoon up near State College, PA, and a fellow's riding down the road in this nice big truck. He had the passenger window open and noticed this little sphere pacing his truck, and it came right into the cab of the truck and moved around and came right up to his leg and flew out through the cab of the truck and was gone. I've had other incidents where these things have come into people's homes and cars through open windows, and once again floated around the interior, and then floated back out the window.
Well, that's obviously not ball lightning for sure.
No, definitely not. Well, we didn't have the conditions for ball lightning in any of the cases I can think of. Many of these were beautiful days, very close range. I mean, we just didn't have those type of conditions. And this phenomena, the more I know about the phenomena we're dealing with, the much stranger it becomes. I mean, I have one of my newest lectures. It's called Strange Aspects of the Elusive Bigfoot, which I've been giving at many, many different events. And for the general public, I'm getting a really good response on it from people. And more people are beginning to say the same thing. You know, if Bigfoot's real, there's got to be something else to it because it makes no sense. And there are so many different aspects that a phenomenon that myself and others have been uncovering over the years that a lot of this is never discussed or very rarely discussed. Many people don't even know about it. And it's just amazing, the phenomena out there. And you get these little tidbits of information from so many different witnesses from widespread areas who are very reluctant to even talk to you about it. And I'll give you a really good example because this just happened a few weeks ago. And this was a couple, and actually this is only miles away from where I live, but it's an area where there's historically been a lot of Bigfoot activity. And this couple was leaving early, going into work as their job, early morning hours, and this huge, hairy Bigfoot walks out about 50 feet in front of their vehicle. And the wife is the one that really was the prime witness, who was the passenger in the car. And she told a relative about it. Well, they didn't even want to talk to me or anybody. They were so shook up, so upset over it. So the relative contacted me, and I'm asking questions about it, and I realized that the people were there because she's asking them questions, and she's getting the information for me. Finally, the wife gets on the phone, and we had a very detailed discussion, and they sent me a very detailed handwritten report. They just couldn't deal with the fact they saw what they saw. But what was very interesting is the comments she made to me. And again, these are people have no interest in the subject, don't care about Bigfoot, didn't believe in it as far as I remember. But anyhow, and I'm going to read just a little bit from a part of the report. The whole encounter seemed to happen so fast. It was long enough that I could get a glimpse of him from head to toe, but it felt like he was gone before I could blink or even look away. I felt like in the movie Predator, how Predator can become invisible and then he can glitch out and you are able to see him. That's what I felt happened with Bigfoot. He was all of a sudden there out of nowhere and then disappeared. And this is what you're getting from so many people. And in fact, it's so amazing because some of these witnesses I interviewed, they use almost the same words. It suddenly appeared out of nowhere and then it was gone. I mean, it's just amazing, these kind of reports. And I'll be glad to tell you about some of the more recent.
That would explain all these accounts of tracks in the snow, where people follow a track, sometimes for miles, and then they'll get out into a clearing and it's gone. The track stops.
Yeah, and that's very recent. And January of last year in North Huntington, Pennsylvania, so you're looking 25 miles outside of Pittsburgh, here in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, which, again, very active with reports. And a family contacted me actually a number of months after this happened, but they sent me a beautiful color video because they went over to record it and recorded what they saw. And it had just been a fresh snow overnight, and they got up early in the morning to see this trail. I believe it was about 70 feet across their yard. These tracks were, I believe, about 16 inches long with a 4 to 5 foot stride between each track. And the tracks are clearly defined. It goes over to the playground area, and they suddenly stop and vanish. So they went back to look at the beginning to see where this thing had come from. They figured probably crossed the road into their yard. Interestingly, it didn't. It suddenly appeared in the yard, the tracks went, and they suddenly disappeared. And this is very common in the reports we're getting from other areas.
That's incredible. I don't know how to explain that. I mean, that's why I'm so interested in the UFO-Bigfoot connection, because if this was an unknown hominid wandering around, we'd obviously have some forensic, evidence of their existence. And apparently these creatures are able to appear and then disappear. And
it may extend to other cryptids as well.
Sure.
Because I'm finding similarities with some of the other encounters with some of these other strange creatures people reporting as well. And again, something I keep trying to emphasize, I'm not trying to suggest that Bigfoot is a passenger flying around in a spacecraft from another world.
Of course.
Because we don't know what the UFOs are.
Right.
I've been saying for years, indications more and more is that we may be dealing with more than one origin for the unknown category. And when I started this so many years ago, everything was, these got to be extraterrestrial spacecraft. Well, the more we know about whatever we're dealing with, the more unusual it is. And it may well be that maybe a small percentage might be extraterrestrial, but we may be dealing with something, again, for lack of a better term, a lot of what I'm seeing indicates something that could be interdimensional.
Sure.
I have no doubt that there's an energy connection to the phenomena we deal with. Because one of the patterns I noticed many years ago is that many close-range, low-level UFO encounters and many encounters with Bigfoot and other cryptids commonly occur in the vicinity of energy sources. So there's a lot of sightings all around those high-tension power lines and power plants and gas wells and gas lines and radio towers or railroad tracks. It goes on and on and on. I have no doubt there's some connection there.
Well, that seems reasonable. Are you familiar with the Hunt for the Skinwalker book?
Very familiar with it.
I spoke with Eric Davis on the phone once, and I was, I wasn't grilling him, but I was asking him about what happened, and he told me this personally, and I'm, it wasn't in confidence, so I will repeat what he told me. When they were observing up on the ranch, they had night vision. They saw what looked like an iris open up, like a hole open up on the ranch, and a huge, hulking bipedal figure crawl out or, hunched down, come out of this hole, and then run off into the night. And that deeply affected me because this is a great physicist. I mean, he's one of the leading experts on advanced propulsion, and that just blew my mind. And other people have reported similar things regarding Bigfoot, seeing these creatures come out of what looks like some kind of a portal.
Exactly. And this is what I wrote about these type of experiences back in the 70s. And you hear about the Skinwalker Ranch, but apparently there are numerous other locations around the country.
Sure. Many
of them are not well known. I'm aware of at least one active right now in Pennsylvania. And it seems as though sometimes, with Bigfoot sightings and other phenomena, lots of times it's a one-time experience. Sometimes these things will stay in the area for a period of time. But sometimes this phenomena seems to concentrate on a particular area for an extended period of time. One of these areas was here in Westmoreland County back in 1979 into the early 1980s. After people had seen some kind of an object fall from the sky that afternoon to the woods. And after that, they began to hear screams and howls and see strange footprints. They began to see Bigfoot around the area, strange lights, Black Panther sightings in the same area around the same time. And this went on for extended time and was being picked up by the news. But there's another ongoing location I'm aware of. This started probably 2 or 3 years ago in a farm area where everything was normal until suddenly the same thing. Many types of paranormal events, apparitions, strange lights, strange objects, all kind of screams and cries, Bigfoot sightings, and it's other people who visited that location as well. So these things do go on, and they may be happening a lot more than people realize. I mean, I've heard from other researchers and people of similar locations around the country, and there's something definitely going on out there. It was a case, and you probably read the case in my Silent Invasion book, but it was a case that occurred, again, along the Chestnut Ridge, near the ridge, back in February 6th of 1974, up near Ohio Pile. So you're looking deep into the mountain areas of Fayette County. Again, one of the most active areas in the country for anomalies, UFOs, Bigfoot, etc. And this was the case, among other cases, that convinced me that there was more to Bigfoot than just an unknown type of primate. And it was an interesting case, and some people will remember the time period because there was gas rationing going on around the country. There was a national trucker strike. There was some violence across the country. So back here in Pennsylvania, the state police and National Guard were patrolling together. So some of those personnel responded to this incident. I couldn't get up the next morning because I couldn't get gas locally to get up there. And it was an incident where a woman who lived in the mountains all her life, she had a nice little cabin home, and she was sitting there watching TV when there was some pop cans on her front porch, and somebody was knocking the pop cans around. And at that point, she remembered there had been a pack of wild dogs coming through several weeks before, and she thought, well, probably the dogs are back. So she decided she was grab a shotgun and load one chamber and just fire over her head and scare the dogs away. Well, she went over and she loaded her shotgun, and she turned on the porch light with this inside switch, stepped out on the front porch, and standing within a few feet of her is this huge, hairy Bigfoot creature with its arms straight up over its head. What's her reaction? She fires right into it with her shotgun. She said there's that bright burst of light, like the flash from a camera, and that creature just vanished and disappeared right in front of her. But then her in-laws, 100 feet away, heard the gunshot and called her right away, and she tried to tell them what occurred, and her son-in-law grabs his pistol, starts walking up that road towards the cabin, said he's surrounded by 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, and around the same time there's this large luminous object with lights on hovering over the trees at the same time. So that was the case, among others, that suggested to me that there's something much more to much of the Bigfoot phenomena.
Oh, boy. It's funny, when you have an experience like that, it changes your life. I was always into UFOs because I've been one of those lucky people who've been seeing them all my life, and I've seen them with a number of friends of mine, and they're all still around, and they will verify it. For some reason, I think I'm able to attract them in some way. But it's always been from a distance. I've never seen one close up, but I probably have had close to 24 serious UFO encounters in my life. So I've always been fascinated by the subject, but I never thought that it would dovetail with the Bigfoot phenomenon.
Well, it's amazing stuff. And just again to show you the possible correlation between some of these phenomena, going back to that wave of 73, north of Pittsburgh, September 27th, there's 2 women waiting for a friend to pick them up outside. While they're standing in the wooded area, this huge 7-8 foot tall, hairy Bigfoot with white hair. Now, you don't very commonly hear about the white ones, but they do report them on occasion. So they see this huge creature with a big stride lumbering across the road towards the woods. That in itself was unusual, but in one of its hands, it was carrying a luminous ball of light. And as it continued off into the trees, a short time later, this object came across the sky, slowed down, projected a beam of light into the woods where the creature ran into, and moved off out of sight. So that, again, was just very, very fascinating. And, again, there were so many little tidbits that showed up from so many different people that didn't know each other. I mean, there were a couple farms along the ridge during that 73 outbreak on the dairy side of the ridge here in Westmoreland County where many, many Bigfoot reports are going on. And we were trying to stake out some of those areas when we could. But we had so many reports coming in, we were only able to do what we could do. And there was one particular night, I remember we were out there, and we had just left the area, and soon later the people had called and said the creature had just come back again, had been in the barnyard. So we hurried back out there, and there were footprints in the barnyard. All the animals were quiet, and this is something I have observed. This is something that was observed during that event that I was telling you about with the woman shooting at the creature and disappeared. The number of animals and even some of their very normally ferocious dogs were completely silent after it happened. That's the police officer confirmed when he got up there. And but going back to this farm, we go back and we see the tracks. The animals are very quiet. They have a big cornfield, so it's already dark. There was something bipedal, very heavy, moving very quickly, making a very loud, heavy breathing, asthmatic-like sound, which was common in many of the Bigfoot reports. We chased it in the dark through the cornfield. I recorded the sound. Whatever it was, we could never catch up to it. But one of the people on the farm brings up the subject and said, this thing's been coming back. We've had people here on the farm. We've seen the creature at we've heard it screaming and crying, and says, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but soon after we either see it or hear it, we see these strange lights on our property. And one's kind of like a reddish fusee that floats low above the ground, illuminates the ground below. I mean, these are the kind of things that people just bring up and don't have any idea what they're dealing with.
I've always wanted to know why. Before I lose my train of thought here. Are you familiar with David Paulides' work, Missing 411?
Yes, I've met David.
Okay. I'm wondering, we obviously know that these creatures are physically real because they're leaving signs of their presence. They're making noise. I mean, I heard it. I saw the damage that it did. And we have these disappearances. Could we extrapolate and assume that Bigfoot is not the benign, mysterious creature that we think it is, and that it might actually be responsible for human disappearances and even human deaths?
Well, I've read some of Dave's work. He does great work. But, of the hundreds of cases I've worked on in Pennsylvania, I mean, there's no indication from what I've seen that these things actually were harmful to people, and I've never seen any correlation of the case I worked on with disappearances. I mean, on occasion over the years, you might have something go on in a general area, but nothing we could correlate with that. And it's just something I've never seen. I'm not saying it's not happening. I'm just not seeing in the data of the cases I've worked on. And I mean, I've had a lot of reports of these things throwing good-sized rocks and small boulders and big branches towards people. A lot of people, their feeling is that it was trying to scare them out of their territory. But cases where these things actually went after people and hurt them, it's just something that is not common around this part of the country.
Well, what's really unusual is the fact that people are reporting juveniles and babies as well. So it's hard for me to grasp if this was ET related or interdimensionally related. Why would they be coming here with family structures? I mean, it just boggles the imagination. I don't get it.
Well, again, it's a much more complicated phenomenon. I definitely do not have the answers. I'll be the first to admit that.
No, I know.
We know a lot about what's going on, but we don't know. And there have been, I mean, a lot of the Bigfoot reports we have here generally are 6 to 9 feet tall. But there have been smaller ones seen about 4 to 5 feet tall as well.
Right.
Can I say they're juvenile ones or are they something else? We just really don't know. And then we've had some very strange cases that indicate that these things could be even much taller. And this is one of the things I bring up in my lecture. You know, for example, as you mentioned before, how much food do you need to sustain one creature all year round under different conditions? Where do they sleep and hide? I mean, in some of the cases where there were close caves or mines in the air, we went in and we searched but we found no evidence they were staying in there.
Right.
The mystery goes on and on and on, and it's mind-boggling the more data we hear about it. And you had talked about seeing some of those tree damage back with your incident many years ago. Well, we continue to hear this, and last year, with all the reports coming in, and we're getting, or we're still getting reports from many people, again, describing these loud howls and extended period of howls, the length of time that they are, and the great vocalizations people are hearing, and there's similarities but differences. More recent years, a lot of people are calling us about what sounds like monkey chatter. And but some of these areas, I mean, some of these people are experienced outdoors people. And I remember one family went up to north of Pittsburgh in the summer of last year, where there's been a history of sightings. And they would say that beautiful afternoon, they're sitting there, and they hear the sound of trees being knocked over and broken. And we go out in their property deep into the woods, and we're finding trees, healthy trees, 9-10 feet up off the ground that were twisted and broken. And I'm pretty familiar with weather phenomena, and this just didn't fit into a microburst or anything else. No other indication of that anywhere in the area. And footprints and just animal reactions of people, and you get similar details from so many different people who don't know each other.
Yeah, we have all these reports from hunters who've had experiences with them on deer hunts, and reports of them stealing their kills, finding deer that have just been torn to shreds with very little eaten, domestic animals just torn to shreds and not eaten, and that's a little disturbing to me.
Yeah, well, one thing we found a long time ago, we noticed, because there was eyewitness accounts, we know they liked apples, corn, and berries. I had numerous reports where these creatures would take whole apples and put a whole apple in their mouth. And and one of the famous incidents I talk about was very interesting. I remember back during the '73 wave, I got a call from the state police up in Indiana, PA, and they had a report of a Bigfoot being shot up there. And they said there appears to be blood on the road. So they wanted us to get our team up there. So it was already evening. We did. We got our team together and found our way up to Indiana County. And when we got up there was numerous people from the area who apparently many had their own personal encounters with these creatures, and they wanted to tell us about it. But we were concentrating on that incident, and it happened up there at an apple orchard, as I recall. People had just picked a bunch of apples and had bushel baskets, and this creature that evening was coming up on the side of the porch, so it was only a few feet away, and they're watching this thing from in the house, and it's taking whole apples and popping whole apples in its mouth. And then it goes over to the side of the house up the front, and it's walking across the road, eating an apple. And the fellow in the house's first reaction is to grab a rifle and shoot at this thing. Well, he waited till it was clear of some houses out there, and he began to fire at this thing. And he said he kept firing into it with no effect on it whatsoever. But when it ran into the woods, it made these horrific screams that caused other people to come outside. And it looked like there was some blood on the road. That's when they called the police. Well, the troopers got there, and they took the apple samples back with them. They got there before we arrived, but they left the blood spots for us. And you got to remember, in 1973, there's no DNA testing at that time.
That's the first question I was going to ask.
We had access to two very well-known national anthropologists, and it took them quite a while, but a lab examined it, and they came back with, this was the closest we could come up with. It's not blood. It was apple juice mixed with saliva.
Weird. God, that's weird.
I mean, there are so many little details that people don't know about these type of reports. And there's one thing that's very strange that I rarely run into, but it's one of the details that I've come in contact with because of interviewing so many people. And it's one detail that the witnesses are around here, and it's maybe a handful over the years I've been doing this has shown up. But there was one instance that I was a witness to before the event happened, so I can confirm this. But there are some people, and I know out in other parts of the country this is much more common, but some people, some hunters, others believe that they have telepathically tried to communicate with the creature, or the creature tried to communicate with them.
I've heard accounts of that. Yeah, I've heard a
And there
number
was
of accounts of that.
Yeah, during that incident up here, I was mentioning back in '79, early '80s, around Westmoreland County, one of the persons who lived around there felt that this thing was trying to communicate. One afternoon, he got this mental impression to go back down to the gas line, which he did, and he sees this huge Bigfoot running across the gas line. But it was an incident that happened not far from the Chestnut Ridge, which I was mentioning earlier, and there have been a number of sightings down there, and different people had seen it, so we took a team down that night, and we're interviewing people, and one of the persons within this group said, very reluctantly and very nervously, that they felt that one of these creatures was mentally trying to communicate with them. And while we are there, the person says that this creature says tomorrow morning, near Homer City in Indiana County, now we're in Westmoreland County, so it's about 15 miles away, there will be a UFO incident tomorrow morning. Well, lo and behold, early the next morning, there's multiple reports of this very strange sound right over the little town of Homer City, which is near a big power plant where there had been a history of UFO sightings since the time they built it. And it led to a search by the local police and the fire department that even made the news. So that was very interesting.
You know, I can't help thinking, could these entities be some kind of scout? Are they scouting out our territory? I mean, you know, I've been thinking about this for quite some time. If you were going to, maybe they're research material. Maybe they're here to perform certain functions and interact with our environment and our ecology and our fauna and flora and us. I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
The more I look into it, the stranger the phenomena is. I've always said the phenomena is so strange it protects itself, because who's going to believe it until you have your own personal encounter? And, you know, the more I know about this, I really believe that the government probably has an interest in both UFOs and Bigfoot, but they probably know a lot more than they're telling us. But I truly believe they don't have the answers themselves. They're still trying to figure it out.
Well, obviously, that's why they wouldn't tell us. If they don't have an answer and they have huge hominids wandering, you know, Earth that are seemingly impossible, they would not want to tell us, not knowing anything. But, you know, what's interesting to me is the Chestnut Ridge area. Have you guys gone up there with any instrumentation and checked for gravitational or geomagnetic anomalies or anything like that? Electromagnetic?
Yeah, we have. We really haven't come up with anything significant over the years. My understanding is that there's an inactive earthquake fault going through it, but it's never been active I'm aware of. And I know people up there tell me there could be a lot of quartz up in some areas. It's mainly limestone, but there's quartz up there. Some people tell me they found some really nice samples up there in the area. But it's an area where also different people have talked about seeing, as you mentioned before, about seeing portals opening up or vortexes, and again, all kind of strange phenomena. One of the phenomena that we heard about in recent years, and I went up there because the people that own the property called me to come up to look. This was several years ago, and I got some nice pictures of it, but it's really hard to see. But they had a lot of property. They had many, many trees. They walked their property every day, and at this time they had called me. They saw something very strange they could not explain. There was a very tall, large tree, probably hollowed out several years ago, but from a lightning strike. But what was different was when they were walking at that time, and it was not there previously or week before, as I recall, inside of this hollowed out, very tall old tree, there was another live tree completely stuck down inside the old tree with roots up, just pushed down and stuffed into the other tree. No other trees like that around the area. Couldn't find any evidence of like a microburst or anything like that in the area. It's just one of the other physical anomalies among the other strange phenomena that's being reported up there.
So after all these years of researching this, do you feel that you're any closer to coming to some kind of conclusion at all about what we're dealing?
I'm not sure about a conclusion, but I think we're seeing a lot more similar data from so many people. And again, I deal mainly in PA, but I get calls from around the country and out of the country. But being in touch with so many other research people, witnesses around the country, so much similar data is beginning to show up. So many more people are beginning to tell similar stories that I think we're beginning to realize now that there's something more going on here. But personally, from what I'm seeing, I think it's so beyond our present scientific understanding that we're just beginning to look at possibilities, but we just don't understand at this point. I think at someday we will have the instrumentation to detect some of this phenomena, but we're just not there yet.
So what are you doing? What are you working on now? What's your next project?
Well, I'm constantly getting reports in here. I mean, I had 2 reports in here today from the last couple of days. It's non-ending. There's so many reports. I'm always interviewing people, and I do a lot of speaking events because my whole thing since I was in high school has been out there educating the public to these reports, and there's a huge, huge interest in these topics, and people want to know more and more about what's going on out there. So I still do that quite a bit, and of course have a lot of family things going on with the grandkids, so I'm a very busy guy.
Have you thought of trying to focus on law enforcement and dig down deeper into that area? Because I know for a fact that a lot of law enforcement have had these experiences and have investigated, very anomalous experiences of others. And I'm curious as to why there's this blackout. I can understand why. Obviously, if Bigfoot and UFOs come under the same rubric, if they're part of a very mysterious and very important phenomenon, the government would probably want to classify that, Bigfoot stuff just as heavily as they would classify UFOs. I've had no luck at all. I got close. I had a guy from the Department of Interior who had recently retired who was going to do a little whistleblowing, and then all of a sudden he calls me up and changed his mind. And I hear that's quite frequent among other investigators to hit that kind of a brick wall.
It could well be that it's more of a localized thing. I'm not aware of anything on an extended area because I am in contact sometimes with people in those fields, and I do get reports from certain areas. And interestingly, very recently, I spoke for a very large expo, which mainly was for first responders. And I've been there for several years, and I get a lot of reports and input from some of these people, and many of them came up to me and shared even events in recent weeks, not necessarily with Bigfoot, but with other phenomena that they've been caught out on over the years. So they do get involved in various incidents which would fall under the anomaly type things I investigate. And on occasion, if something arises, I'll hear from them. So I do think that there are people out there in these fields that are aware of these things going on, and then sometimes they will share the reports.
Are you of the opinion that these incidents are increasing, or is it just that with the advent of the internet and all these modern ways of communication and dissemination of information, that just more and more people are becoming aware of the phenomenon and are more inclined to report such things and research such things, or are these incidents increasing? I mean, it seems to me that they're increasing because we're getting more and more anecdotal reports from people. And a lot of these people, like you say, have no interest in Bigfoot, but they have this incredible experience and they feel they have to tell somebody.
Yeah, well, I receive reports every year. And since that 73 outbreak of Bigfoot sightings, we've had Bigfoot reports every year in Pennsylvania. Nothing to the extent we did in the 70s for whatever reason. We've never been able to figure out why there was so much going on. But it goes every year, but some years we see that little spurt. And last year, and interestingly still continuing, we're having a lot of different reports coming in with Bigfoot and other cryptids and UFOs and other phenomena, and it's still ongoing right now. And why it's going on, I don't know. But again, some of the Bigfoot activity was very significant over the last year or so. And so it'll be interesting to see what comes around the next corner. But this year looks like it's starting out pretty actively.
Well, I think we pretty much covered everything, Stan, and it's really been an enjoyable conversation, and I look forward to interviewing you again if anything comes around. Please feel free to get in touch with me because I think this is an extremely important subject, and having had a personal experience that I simply cannot explain in any logical scientific way, I think it's extremely important and right up there with the UFO phenomenon. Who knows? They may be connected. I mean, it certainly appears that way to me. I can't
Oh,
make a conclusion to that effect, but I don't see any other way to explain this, because of the lack of forensic physical evidence. We're
well,
dealing. Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, you've got to look at the multitudes of eyewitnesses. The similarities are the little details I look at. I've seen the emotional response of people. I mean, some of these cases and some of the witnesses in recent months, and there was one case outside of Pittsburgh in November. I mean, this creature walked out 5 feet on a dark road, 5 feet in front of the witness on the road, and stopped there and looked at him eye to eye with its glowing red eyes. This guy gave one of the best detailed accounts that I've ever heard of over the years. I interviewed him soon after it happened. I was down at the scene with him the next day, and he was physically still shaking. I mean, there's no way that some of these people are making these stories up. Something is happening that's affecting them, and once you see it, people's lives are changed.
Absolutely. Well, Stan, it's been great, and you have a great day, and hopefully we'll get back in touch again soon.
That sounds good. Yeah, people would want to get updated information on sightings and where I'll be speaking at. They can go to my website, which is stangordon.info. There's also contact information on there, how they can reach me.
Excellent. All right, Stan. You take care.
Thanks for having me on the program.
All right. Bye-bye.